Archie, when I retire, I'm going to spend a lot less money than I do right now.
You sure about that? I know exactly how many golf balls you go through in a year. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to Last Paycheck. We're your hosts, Archie Hoxton and Rob Hoxton. And today, we're talking about expenses that you may not expect when you get to retirement.
Yeah, surprises, right?
Yeah, surprises.
You spend all your, working with a financial advisor for years as you're planning for retirement, and everybody thinks they know what they're going to spend in retirement. And then you pull the trigger and you're retired, and bam, you're spending more than you planned for.
Right. Most people actually kind of think that, well, I'm not going to be working anymore, and I'm probably going to be spending less. Kids are out of the house. Sometimes if, maybe your kids just got out of the house and then bam, you retire. That was your cue. You may be surprised because it usually, for many people, kind of works the opposite way, where you spend a lot more.
So here's a scenario. I can see this happening. You've decided you're going to play more golf in retirement, right? So, well, number one, if you play golf like I do, you're going to buy a lot more balls,
yeah,
right? Because the more golf you play, the more balls you lose,
yeah,
and they're pretty pricey. The other thing is that I'm sure that if I start playing more golf when I retire, I'm going to realize that this set of clubs that I've got, this old set of clubs, is the primary reason that my game is so bad.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go out and buy a new set of golf clubs. The same is true with any hobby, right? Like you've got a nice fishing rig and you're like, okay, this is gonna be great. And then you realize I could catch much bigger fish much more easily if I spent more money on this equipment.
Right.
It's going to be true. And it's
Gonna need a new
especially
boat.
true. Yeah. Yeah. Now that I'm retired, I can't fish off the dock anymore. I got to have a boat, and it can't be a canoe. It's got to have two motors. You know how it goes. So anyway.
Yeah, it's easy to get carried away because all of a sudden you've got so much more time on your hands. And, when you're working, it's almost like you're a little too busy to be spending too much money. You've got too much going on. But now you've got to figure out how you're going to fill your time. Like you said, new hobbies, new toys.
Yeah, you're at home more and you're like sitting there looking at that same deck that has been there for 25 years and you never really noticed how bad it looked. Now you got to rip it off and put a new one on. It was funny. It's been years ago, but I was at church one day and one of our clients went to church with us and she quietly came up to me and said, "Look, my husband is driving me crazy. Is there any way, have you ever taken on any 65-year-old interns at Hoxton?" I was like, well, no, but we could,
Yeah.
And so the whole dynamic, so much about your life will change when you have the time and
Right.
you're retired.
Right. Yeah. The project car that seems like, oh, it's just a couple $1,000 and then I'll just tinker on it. That can quickly turn into something very expensive. So, I think if you think of different categories of spending that can go up, one of them is just the fun stuff.
Right.
Right.
All of those things you've been putting off.
Right.
Travel or whatever.
Travel's a big one, right? You're going to have more time, and maybe you've said, we've been wanting to take this trip with friends, and we've been talking about it for years. We keep putting it off. Well, now we've got time. There's no reason not to. Or, you get to Friday night and you're thinking, why shouldn't we go out? And that happens over and over and over. And I think you can kind of run into this mindset of, well, I've made it. I've earned this. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, this is probably the most dangerous, sort of mindset. It's that sense of, and it's almost like a sense of entitlement. And we've seen it on many occasions, and oftentimes it ends disastrously. But it's like, look, I have worked my entire life, 35, 40 years, and I've put off a lot of things that I've been wanting to do. I'm going to spend the money on it.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if there's a complete disregard for the reality of what the finances actually look like.
Right.
The other thing that happens, Archie, is that quite often, and you've seen it, is that there's this sort of internal negotiation that goes on with, in people's minds. And it's like, look, I know we plan for there to be some buffer, some extra money when we get to the end of our life expectancy, and that's going to go to the kids. But these numbers look pretty big, and I'd rather live more now than have more at the end of my life. And you know what? The kids are kind of responsible for themselves. We helped them get an education. But there's this sort of internal negotiation that we see happening all the time, right?
Right.
And I think that's fine, but you have to recognize what's actually happening here. You've got to watch that spending.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that can happen is it's easy to, once you've retired, to kind of slip into, okay, I'm old now mindset, and I don't have much time left. Rather than, and you just sort of throw caution and discipline to the wind. Whereas retirement, in some ways, it's important to enjoy and do the things that you've been putting off and enjoy the freedom from being tied to the desk. But it's important to stay disciplined and cautious, just as you were in your working years, and not take on this, sort of, I'm old now, I've made it, I'm done mindset. I'm not gonna be careful anymore, and still strike that balance.
So maybe talk a little bit, Archie, about kind of what we see and what research shows happens in people's actual spending once they cross the threshold into what we would define as traditional retirement. Traditional retirement being where you stop working for a paycheck and start living on your pension, Social Security, and investment earnings.
Right. So there are several expenses that there's been research done on, the types that show up much more often. One of them is home improvements and home changes. You can kind of picture it. You're sitting at the house. You've got more time at the house than you've had in 20 years, and you're like you said with the deck, or maybe it's, man, these floors are looking awfully rough, or a new kitchen would be really nice.
So the research shows that right after retirement, for those years while we're still feeling pretty good and we've got our health, hopefully, there's a really good chance we're going to spend more than we planned. But then things start to change, and we may spend actually less than we planned. But right about the time that we start spending less on all of those things that we like, what happens?
Yeah, so
the big health insurance.
Yeah, you start running into health issues, medical costs go up. If you need any kind of long-term care, that can go through the roof, and become extremely expensive.
So healthcare spending goes up a ton. In fact, there's been a bunch of research on what retirees tend to spend on healthcare, and it's like over $250,000 in their lifetime after they've retired. So a lot of that's covered, hopefully, by insurance. But it is, you retire, you get a little bump in your spending, then it starts to decline. And right about the time it starts to decline, because maybe you're getting older and don't feel like traveling or whatever, that's about the time those other healthcare costs come up. So that's the dynamic. There's a lot to be mindful of.
Another one that's interesting, along with that sort of curve where you got the jump in spending and then the dip and then the jump again. Many people don't consider how transportation costs can add up. And, if you're like most people and you drive your car around and you know what your expenses are, you've got insurance, you've got gas, or, maybe charging, property tax, maybe a car payment. You've got a good handle on that. But what happens if you lose your ability to drive as you age? You've got to figure out a way to get around. Maybe you're lucky and you've got a family member or a friend who can drive you around, but maybe not. Maybe you need to, take Uber, or maybe, have someone actually hire a driver. That's something that some people find that they don't have a choice because they've got to get around. They've got things to do, but maybe they had a stroke and can't drive. And so that's another cost. That there is some data that I came across that the average American 65 or older spends $7,160 on transportation a year. And so that's something to really consider too. That, like I said, especially later in life when healthcare costs are rising, that might be a factor.
So the driving thing is an interesting. We should just talk about. I'm a terrible driver to begin with, and I just want to go on record with all these listeners that as I get older, you're not going to take my keys away from me, right? That I, even though, and the reason I'm going to use is because if I can't drive, it's going to be more expensive, right? So you can't take my keys away. If I go out and I come back with a little rash on the car, you're just going to have to just be okay with that, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean that's something that's a very difficult thing to come to terms with if it's getting to the point where it's dangerous for yourself or other people. There's a great sense of freedom that comes with being able to drive.
Another common cost that you've got to keep in mind is you might need a little bit of help around the house. You might need help with some of your activities of daily living, and a lot of people own long-term care insurance, but it's become prohibitively expensive for most people. So if you find yourself later in your later years, you may have medical expenses, but you also may have expenses just for your care.
Right.
Right. So you may need somebody to come in from, and there are a lot of organizations in the community that provide these services, but you may need some help around the house.
Right.
It could be just, doing some things, tidying up and keeping things straight in the house, but it may also be more in depth, like helping you bathe or prepare food or get dressed. And so these are I wouldn't call them unexpected. They shouldn't be unexpected expenses, but they are frequently expenses that come along unless you have a family member that's willing to provide those services for you at no charge.
Yeah, most people aren't surprised by the reality they might need that, but maybe they haven't planned for exactly what that cost looks like.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect their financial plan? And that's the thing. I mean, some people find that they have major changes in their behavior that changes their how they spend their time, that changes their financial picture and how much they're spending. Some things will just kind of happen to you that you should plan for and understand the costs. And if you are planning for that and you're thinking, that might be hard to make work, you have a community that you live in. There are services that are provided by volunteers, right? So I know a large number of recipients of Meals on Wheels, for example, are elderly people in the community who can't get out and get groceries and just need someone to do that for them. And that's a large organization that provides a ton of aid, particularly to the elderly community.
So as you plan for retirement, it's important. And if you're working with a financial planner, hopefully that financial planner is going to sort of ask probing questions and really sort of dig deep into what your spending might look like in retirement. And you shouldn't assume that it's going to look a lot like it does now while you're in your working years. So it's true that maybe before you retire, maybe you pay off the mortgage. It may be that you pay off your car loans. But a lot of us are going to live for a long time in retirement. You may need another car. So what you have to do is think, what could be different about the way I spend if I have both my health and more time on my hands?
Right.
Got to think about that. And then later in life, how do I want to age? Do I want to age in place? Do I want to move to a retirement community where maybe there's some services provided there? That's a scenario in which you can get some cost estimates, right?
Yeah.
And plan for that. But those are conversations that if you're working with a financial advisor, financial planner, hopefully a certified financial planner, that you'll have those conversations with them. If you're doing this on your own, give it some thought, do some research, make sure that you're not assuming that your spending will go down in retirement, because the rule of thumb is that your spending will decline substantially in retirement. But that's not what we're finding to be the case.
Right. And that's, again, it's arguably as important to plan your time as it is, and your life as it is to plan the financial piece. I mean, you need to plan the financial piece. You need to make sure it works. But plan your time too, because too much time on your hands, you can blow up the financial piece very, very easily. But you can find the balance. Do what you love. You may spend a little bit more money. Just make sure that works in the financial side of it, and then go crazy and have fun.
And trust me, your financial planner doesn't like to tell you shouldn't spend so much money any more than you like to hear your financial planner say that. It's a really awkward conversation. It's what I like least about the job that we have. But, we're going to be truth tellers. We're going to tell you if we think you're spending too much.
Right. Yep, that's important. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. So hopefully this was informative and helpful, and gives you some tips for planning out your own retirement, or thoughts you can bring to your financial planner if you have one. But remember to like and subscribe, share it with your family and friends, and leave us a comment and tell us what you think. So anyway, have a great one, and we'll see you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.